Hello and welcome. In this video we'll review some of the techniques we can use to rough and finish a contour. The geometry on the screen is a simple 3-inch square. X0, Y0 is on the left hand side at the center of this grid. Z0 is at the top of the part. We're going to contour the profile of this square using depth of cuts and multi-passes. Now let's move over into the left into the Toolpath Manager, and I'm going to click on Stock Setup and identify the size of the stock. And in the Y it's 3.5 inches, the X 3.5 inches, and the thickness of the part, the Z value, is 1 inch. I'm just going to move down to the bottom and click on OK. Now again, over in the left in the Toolpath Manager, I'm going to click on the parameters in this contour operation, and as you can see we've only got one operation. I'm going to click on parameters. I'm just going to move over to the Toolpath Parameters page, and as you can see we're using a 1-inch flat end mill. Let's move back now into Contour Parameters and review some of the values that we have set up here. Now moving down to top of stock, it's in absolute and the top of stock is at 0. Just below, the depth is also in absolute and it has a value of -1 inch. Now just sliding over to the right, you can see I've got lead in, lead out activated, but at the moment multi-passes and depth of cuts aren't turned on. I'm going to pick OK, and let's review the toolpath operation that we have right now. I'm going to move up to the toolbar and click on Verify. Now I'm just going to slide this dialog box up. The speed, I'm just going to slow it down and then move back to the top and click on Machine. Now here's our 1-inch diameter end mill leading in, and we just go around this contour in one cut. I'm going to pick OK. Now we're going to contour the profile of this square using depth of cuts and multi-passes. Now let's go back into parameters again. Now as you can see over in the right hand corner here, depth of cuts is not activated. I'm going to click on it to activate it and then click on the button depth of cuts. Now here's the depth of cuts dialog box. Now before we go on, what I'd like to review is some of the fields in this dialog box. So in the bottom right hand corner, I'm going to click on the question mark. And here we are in Help, and we're at the page Depth Cuts dialog box Contour. Now we've got an explanation up here to set the number of depth of cuts. You can enter a maximum rough step, and MasterCam divides the total depth into equal steps. Now let's move over now into depth of cuts. At the very top here, maximum rough step, and it's set to 0.5, half an inch. Well, let's move back into Help and click on Field Definitions. And what I'm going to do is click on Maximum Rough Step. And here it says sets the maximum amount of material removed in the Z-axis with each rough cut. Now, to set the number of depth cuts, you can enter a maximum rough step, and MasterCam divides the total depth into equal steps. And as you can see, our maximum rough step is set to 0.5. Or you can enter the exact number of finish steps and the size of each finish step. Now MasterCam never creates unequal rough depth cuts. Now just below max rough step we have number of finish cuts, and it sets to 1. Let's go back into Help and click on Finish Cuts, and as you can see sets the number of finish cuts for the contour toolpath. Now this number multiplied by the finish step value equals the total amount of stock cut by the finish passes. Let's move on down below to finish step, and if you look over on the left in the depth cuts dialog box, our finish step is set to 0.05, 50 thou. Now back in help, it explains sets the amount of material removed in the z-axis with each finish cut. This number multiplied by the number of finish passes equals the total amount of stock cut by the finish passes. So my finish step is 50 thou. Now let's go one step down, keep tool down, and as you can see on the left I've got a check mark against keep tool down. Now what does that do? Now this determines whether or not to retract the tool between depth cuts. Now as I've got it activated, the tool isn't going to retract between each pass around this contour. Now let's move on down just below subprogram, and that's not check mark. Let's go back into help. Now subprogram, it creates subprogram lines in the NCI file. Now a subprogram is a block of NC code which is designed to be called several times from the main CNC program, and I'm going to leave it unchecked. Now moving over to the top right hand corner, depth cut order, we've got two options here, by contour and by depth. So let's move back over into help, and I'm going to click on by pocket, and as you can see at the top, by pocket / contour. Now this performs all depth cuts in a contour or region before moving to the next contour or region. Now what does that mean? For example, if I have 4 separate chains to contour in a single contour operation, it will complete the first contour to the final depth and then move over and complete the remaining contours. Whereas by depth creates depth cuts at the same level in every contour and then descends to the next step for each contour. Now let's minimize help. These values that we have set, just an important thing to note here, max rough step and finish step, these values are values along the z-axis. So our max rough step is 1/2 inch. We're taking 1 finish cut, and that finish step is 50 thou. I'm going to go down to the bottom of this dialog box and click on OK, and I'm finished here in contour. I'm going to go down to the bottom and hit OK. Now over in the left in the toolpath manager, you can see I've got a red X against this operation. I'm going to move on up and click on regenerate all dirty operations. And now let's move into verify and see what we've got. So just a couple of steps to the right, verify selected operations. Just going to slide this window up. So we got the speed fairly slow. I'm going to move to the top now and click on machine. Now our first cut is at a depth of Z minus 0.475. The second cut is at a depth of Z minus 0.95. There's our 50 thou thickness at the bottom, and then this final pass is at our depth of Z minus 1 inch. Now let's move over to the left and click on OK. Let's go back into this parameters for contour, and now let's activate multi-passes. I'm going to click on the multi-passes button. Now multi-pass allows you to approach the geometry in steps instead of cutting right to the geometry on the first cut, which is what we've been doing. We can create multiple roughing and finishing passes. Now if we look in the multi-passes dialog box, There are basically three main sections. At the top, roughing passes, just down below, finish passes, and at the bottom, machine finish passes at. Now these values, these spacing values, 0.2, and down below the finish passes spacing 0.05, these are values in the XY plane, whereas in depth of cuts these were values along the Z axis. Now before we move on, I'm going to move down into the bottom right hand corner and click on the question mark for help, and here we are back in help again, multi-passes dialog box. Now I'm going to move over to the field definitions, and let's start at the top, roughing passes, finish passes. Now I'm going to click on a number in help, and as you can see, this is the number for both roughing passes and finish passes. If I click on it, enter the number of cutting passes you want MasterCam to create. So we have 2 roughing passes, and down in the finish section we've got 1 finish pass. Now let's check out spacing, and as you can see over in the left we've got spacing for rough and spacing for finishing. Now spacing, enter the amount of stock to remove with each cut. Now moving back to the multi-passes dialog box, the spacing for roughing is 0.2, 200 thou, and our finish pass is 0.05, 50 thou. Now down below, machine finish passes at, I've got it checked to final depth, and as you can see here, back in help, performs a single finish pass at the final depth, as opposed to all depths, performs finish passes at every cut depth, and we don't have this option activated. And at the very bottom you can see I got a check mark against keep tool down, and if we go into help and click on this link, as in depth of cuts determines whether or not to retract the tool between depth cuts, so the cutter is going to stay down between passes. Now let's minimize help, and just a review, for roughing the spacing is 200 thou, we've got 1 finish pass, and the spacing is 50 thou, and our machine finish passes are set to the final depth. I'm going to go down and pick OK, and move over to the bottom and pick OK. Now as you can see, we've got that red check mark that's appeared again. Let's move on up and regenerate all dirty operations. Now let's check out this toolpath in Verify so we can see depth of cuts and what multi-passes has performed. So I'm just going to slide off to the right and move into Verify. I'm just going to slide this window up and hit the machine button. Now for multi-passes we've got 2 rough passes and the spacing is 200 thou. We have 1 finish pass and the spacing is 0.05, and that finish cut is performed on the contour at the final depth. There's our 50 thou there at the bottom, value in Z. And our last cut took 50 thou off the contour. I'm going to move over to the left and hit OK. Now that completes our contouring operation using depth of cuts and multi passes. Thanks for checking out the video.